My name is Olivia Grant. I'm 29. And the day I buried my grandfather wasn't just the day I lost him. It was the day I realized I'd lost my last shield against them. Against my mother, Victoria Grant. The woman who wears grief like jewelry, who delivers cruelty with a smile, and against Dennis Wallace, her shadow, her mouthpiece, her enforcer in a tailored coat. While I stood by the grave, holding back tears, they stood across the plot, already planning what to take next. I thought grief would be the hardest part. Turns out, it was just the opening act. Because less than a week after the funeral, I came home with coffee and bagels, only to find myself locked out of my own house. New locks, new real estate listing, and a for sale sign planted like a knife in the front yard. Their message couldn't have been clearer. This isn't your home anymore. But here's the thing about people like me. You push us out, we find the receipts. You shut the door, we file the paperwork. And when you try to sell the only place we've ever called safe, we don't just fight back. We freeze the sale. We gather witnesses. We show up with video proof and a speaker loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. If you've ever been erased from what's rightfully yours, if you've ever had to fight your own family just to keep a roof over your head, stay with me, because this is how I turned every lie, every lock, every lawsuit, into the loudest no they've ever heard. The air at Green Lake Cemetery was damp and cold. Seattle's early March sky weighed heavy with gray. I stood there, my black coat clinging to me like a second skin, staring down at the mahogany casket that held the man who had been my only real family. People surrounded me, distant cousins I barely knew, neighbors offering polite condolences, but all I could really hear was the hollow ringing in my ears. The minister's voice blurred into background noise. Across the plot, my mother stood with her arms crossed, her face a perfectly composed mask of indifference. Victoria Grant. Always elegant, always detached. Not a single tear. She wore her grief like she wore her pearls, calculated and for appearance. Beside her stood Dennis Wallace, broad shoulders, tailored coat, and that same dismissive sneer I remembered from every childhood Christmas I wasn't invited to. He didn't belong here. He never did. And yet, there he was, hovering close to my mother, like a shadow with a bank account. The service ended with a thin chorus of Amen, and people began to drift toward their cars. I stayed rooted to the spot, staring at the fresh dirt piled at the edge of the grave. My hands trembled inside my gloves. Somewhere deep in my mind, I heard Harold's voice again. This house is your anchor, Olivia. Never forget that. I closed my eyes, clutching that thought like a life preserver. By the time I pulled up in front of Grandpa's house on Maple Drive, the sun had already started setting, painting the street in dull shades of orange and gray. The house looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. I let myself in with the key he gave me last summer, the brass cold in my palm. The living room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. His chair by the window sat empty, the plaid blanket still draped over the armrest like he'd just stepped away. I stood in the middle of the room, my coat still on, staring at the bookshelf where he used to keep the novels he read aloud to me when I was little. The silence pressed down on me like a second funeral. The front door opened behind me. I turned, heart jumping. Victoria stood there. No knock. No hesitation. She didn't bother removing her sunglasses, even though the sun was nearly gone. "You're still here," she said, stepping inside as if she owned the place. My throat tightened. This was his house. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she walked past me, surveying the room like a buyer inspecting a property. "You should start thinking about next steps," she said casually, picking up a picture frame and setting it back down without looking at the photo inside. Funeral's over. Life moves on. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. I'm staying here for a while. She turned, one eyebrow arched. Don't get too comfortable in this house, Olivia. The words hit me harder than I expected, like a slap in a room where no one could see it. She didn't wait for a reply. Within seconds, she was out the door, her perfume lingering like bad news. I stayed frozen, staring at the empty doorway. Minutes passed before I noticed the envelope sitting on the coffee table, half hidden under Grandpa's favorite crossword book. My name was handwritten on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Meeting scheduled. Reading of Harold Grant's will. March 14th, 10 a.m., Lawson and Associates. I set the paper down with shaking hands and looked up at the photo of Grandpa on the mantel. His smile was soft, worn from years of love and labor. I'll fight if I have to, I whispered. And I meant it. When Eric opened the folder, I felt like my entire life was inside. The leather chair beneath me felt too large, too stiff. I sat in his downtown office, 7th floor, trying not to wring my hands. The view outside the window showed a cloudy stretch of Seattle skyline, but all I could focus on was the pale manila folder sitting between us on his mahogany desk. Eric Lawson cleared his throat, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. His office smelled like old books and coffee, comforting in a sterile, intimidating way. Across the room, Victoria sat with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her lips pressed into a single angry line. Dennis hovered behind her like a bodyguard, jaw clenched, eyes boring holes into the back of Eric's head. I caught Dennis's reflection in the glass window, shoulders rigid, teeth grinding. I wondered if he even realized he was doing it. Eric flipped open the folder. The sound was soft, but felt like a gunshot in the silent room. "I'll begin," he said, his voice low and measured. Somewhere deep in my memory, I heard Harold's voice again. "Always keep records. Paper doesn't lie." Eric began reading. It started with standard legal language. Being of sound mind. This is my final will and testament. The kind of formality that felt surreal when it belonged to someone you loved. Then the words changed. "With regards to my residence at 217 Maple Drive." I held my breath. "I hereby leave full ownership, including all rights and titles, to my granddaughter, Olivia Grace Grant." The words sank in slowly, like ink on wet paper. My heart stuttered. For a second, I felt weightless. Then came the crash. Victoria shot to her feet so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood. "This is fraud." Her voice cracked at the edges. "He was manipulated." He wasn't in his right mind. Dennis's fists curled tighter at his sides. Eric didn't flinch. He placed the folder down, fingers laced together atop it. "Mrs. Grant," he said evenly, "your father executed this will with full mental capacity. I oversaw the signing myself. There were witnesses present. All legal formalities were followed to the letter." Victoria turned on him. "You're lying for her." Eric adjusted his glasses again, unfazed. "I'm stating facts." Dennis finally spoke, voice low and rough. "We'll see what the courts have to say." I wanted to say something, anything, but the lump in my throat wouldn't let the words out. The air felt thick, like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Victoria grabbed her purse, her hands shaking despite her attempt to look composed. As she passed by my chair, she leaned in close enough that I could feel her breath on my ear. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Not by a long shot." She straightened her jacket, flipped her sunglasses down, and walked out with Dennis close behind. The door slammed with a sharp finality. I sat there, motionless, staring at the space they'd just vacated. Eric exhaled slowly and turned toward me. His voice softened, but the warning underneath was unmistakable. "Brace yourself," he said. "They won't give up easily." I nodded, my hands still trembling in my lap. Leaving his office, I stepped out into the Seattle air, half victorious, half terrified of what would come next. I came back with coffee and bagels, and found myself locked out of my own house. The Sunday morning air was crisp, with just enough bite to make me tighten my jacket as I pulled into the driveway at 114 Maple Drive. The paper bag from the corner bakery sat on the passenger seat, still warm. 2 everything bagels. 1 cinnamon raisin. Grandpa's favorites. Old habits die hard, I guess. I grabbed the bag and my coffee cup, juggling both as I walked up the familiar stone path toward the front door. When I reached for my keys, a strange sensation pulled at my chest. Something felt off. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. Confused, I tried again, jiggling the handle, pressing my shoulder against the door. The deadbolt refused to budge. I stepped back and stared at the door frame. That's when I noticed it. A shiny new deadbolt above the original lock. Fresh metal. No scratches. Installed recently. My heart sank. I knocked, starting gently, then louder. A long pause. Then the door swung open. Victoria stood there. Lipstick perfect. Hair smooth and set. Dressed in a charcoal blazer and silk blouse like she was headed to a shareholders' meeting instead of lounging at home on a weekend morning. "Olivia," she said flatly, folding her arms. "What are you doing here? What am I doing here?" My voice cracked from disbelief. "This is my house. Grandpa left it to me. What the hell, Mom?" She tilted her head, surveying me like I was a door-to-door solicitor. "You don't live here anymore." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Dennis appeared behind her, arms crossed, leaning casually against the doorframe like a bouncer at a nightclub. His stare was as cold as the steel lock keeping me out. I fumbled in my bag and pulled out the folded copy of the will Eric had given me, holding it out like a shield. "This says otherwise." Victoria barely glanced at the paper. Her smile stretched, thin and sharp. "Paper can say many things, but what matters is possession, and you're not in possession." I stood there, stunned. "You changed the locks?" "Of course." Her tone was breezy, almost amused. "You weren't here. The house was vulnerable." I took a shaky breath, fighting back the sting in my eyes. "You have no right." She shrugged, stepping back toward the hallway. "Let the lawyers handle it." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. The sharp click of the deadbolt locking behind me was louder than the door slam itself. I stood there on the porch, holding a bag of cooling bagels and a cup of coffee that suddenly tasted like ash. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling. Before I could dial Eric, my screen lit up with an incoming call. "Megan." I answered immediately. "Meg?" Her voice was rushed, panicked. "You need to see this, like, now." "What?" "Your mom just listed the house online." I froze. "What?" "It's on every real estate site, $590,000. Photos, description, the whole thing." The bag of bagels slipped from my fingers and hit the porch with a soft thud. I stood there, cold and breathless, staring at the locked door, realizing this was only the beginning. They weren't just kicking me out. They were selling my future for $590,000. I sat on Megan's worn-out couch, staring at her laptop screen like it was broadcasting the end of my life in high definition. There it was, my grandfather's house. My house. Bright, wide-angle photos of the living room where we used to play board games. The backyard garden where he'd taught me how to grow tomatoes. Even the front porch swing, freshly polished to look inviting, as the listing described it. Charming 3-bedroom, 1 bath with original hardwood floors, motivated sellers, price to move quickly. I scrolled down, bile rising in my throat. A virtual tour link. Contact information for a real estate agent named Kelly Morris. Megan hovered beside me, chewing her thumbnail. "This isn't a joke, Liv. They're serious." I grabbed my phone and dialed the brokerage number listed. "Hello, Sunset Realty," a chipper voice answered. I cleared my throat, pitching my voice low like an anonymous buyer. "Hi, I'm calling about the property on Maple Drive. Is it still available?" "Absolutely." Kelly's voice practically sparkled through the line. "The sellers are highly motivated. We've already had a few inquiries." Motivated. Of course they were. I forced a smile that no one could see. "Is there an open house scheduled?" "Not yet," she chirped, "but private showings can be arranged. Would you like me to set something up?" I ended the call with a vague promise to follow up. My hands were shaking. Megan sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through her phone. "This isn't just petty, Olivia. They're bulldozing through legal gray areas now." I rubbed my temples. "Eric's handling the will, but I didn't think I'd need more lawyers this soon." "Well, you do now," she said, tossing her phone onto the coffee table. "You need a real estate attorney, someone who knows how to freeze a sale like this." "And where exactly am I supposed to find one? On Craigslist?" Megan gave me a flat look. "Lucky for you, my cousin works for one. Laura Bennett. Downtown. I'll text her now." An hour later, I found myself sitting in a cramped but fiercely organized office on the fourth floor of a building that smelled like copier toner and cheap coffee. Laura Bennett wasn't much older than me, but her sharp suit and even sharper glare gave her the presence of someone twice her age. She scanned the printout of the listing and the copy of the will I'd brought. Then she looked up at me, voice steady and cold. "You're going to need a lis pendens." "A what?" "It's a legal notice," she said, already opening a file on her computer. "Latin for suit pending. It basically tells the world that there's an active legal dispute over this property. No bank will touch it. No buyer will close on it. It freezes the sale." I leaned forward. "How fast can we file it?" Her fingers danced over the keyboard. "If I clear my schedule, within 72 hours. Tops." Her words settled over me like both a promise and a threat. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Do it." As I left her office, my phone buzzed with a new text. "Dennis, better start packing." I stared at the screen, heart pounding, then slid the phone back into my pocket. Not a chance. Sometimes family isn't blood. Sometimes it's who stands on your porch with a statement in hand. The drizzle had turned into a steady curtain of rain by the time I made it to the Thompsons' front door. Their house sat 2 lots down from mine, or what used to be mine, its front porch framed by potted geraniums and a wooden bench. Harold once helped Mr. Thompson building. I pulled my hood tighter, walked up the steps, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. "Olivia," Mr. Thompson said, adjusting his glasses. His gray cardigan hung loose over his frame, and he smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and rain. "Come in, dear. We've been expecting you." Mrs. Thompson appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "We saw the for sale sign go up yesterday," she said, voice laced with disapproval. "Arthur said, she'll be here soon enough. And here you are." I stepped inside, shaking off the cold. Their living room felt like a time capsule of neighborhood cookouts and Christmas potlucks. The smell of cinnamon rolls lingered in the air. "Tea?" Mrs. Thompson asked. I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. I need your help." They exchanged a glance, then gestured for me to sit. I pulled out my phone, ready to take notes or photos. Anything. "Harold told us many times," Mr. Thompson began, settling into his recliner. "That house was meant for you. Every time we sat out on the porch, he'd say, 'When I'm gone, Olivia will finally have her place.'" Mrs. Thompson disappeared into the hallway and returned with a faded printout. She handed it to me with careful fingers, as though it were something fragile. I stared at it. An email from Harold, dated last October. Subject: "Finalizing things to Margaret Thompson. Just wanted you and Arthur to know. Made it official with Eric today. The house will go to Olivia. She's earned it in every way. My throat tightened. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Then another. Then one more for good measure. We'll testify if we have to, Mr. Thompson said, voice low but steady. You just say the word. I nodded, blinking back tears. Thank you. Both of you. Mrs. Thompson patted my hand. Your grandfather loved you more than anything, dear. We saw it every day. As I stood to leave, I paused at their front window. From here, I could just make out my bedroom window on the second floor of Harold's house, my old bedroom. The blinds were drawn, but it felt like staring at a battlefield waiting for me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Laura. I answered on the first ring. Get ready, she said without preamble. We're filing list pendants first thing tomorrow. If they wanted to sell my house, I was about to make it the most complicated sale of their lives. The sky over Seattle looked like wet concrete as I climbed the stairs to Laura Bennett's office. The chill in the air settled deep into my bones, but adrenaline kept me moving. I pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. Laura stood behind her desk, sleeves rolled up, already scanning a stack of papers. Her legal assistant, Casey Rivera, a wiry woman with short hair and sharp eyes, hovered nearby, phone tucked between her shoulder and ear. Morning, Laura said without looking up. Sit. I obeyed. Laura shoved a thick packet toward me. List pendants paperwork. I drafted it last night. Your job. Sign where I've highlighted. Don't overthink. Just sign. I blinked at the sheer number of pages, but I picked up the pen. The words blurred as I read, but the meaning was clear enough. This wasn't just paperwork. This was the first shot fired. Are you sure this will work? I asked, my voice catching. It buys us time, Laura said. It clouds the title. Anyone trying to buy the house will see there's a legal dispute. No bank will finance it. No title insurance. It's like slapping a big red warning sign on your property. I nodded and kept signing. Megan's text popped up as I finished the last signature. Rooting for you. Don't let them win. I smiled at the screen, just for a second, before setting my phone back down. Casey grabbed the signed papers and stuffed them into a waterproof folder. I'm running these down to King County right now, she said, already heading for the door. Laura followed her to the hallway, then turned back to me. You just froze a $590,000 deal, she said, with a small, grim smile. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The weight of weeks of fear lifted just enough for me to sit back and close my eyes. But relief, it turned out, was short-lived. By the time I returned to my office after lunch, back to my marketing job that now felt like a distant second priority, I opened my inbox to find a single new email. Subject: See you in court, princess. From Dennis Wallace. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. By noon, my inbox was a war zone. I sat at the back counter of the cafe, barely able to focus on the half-empty cappuccino I was supposed to deliver to table 6. My phone vibrated again for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Another email. Subject: Disgusting. From Unknown. Can't believe you'd manipulate a dying man like that. Shame on you. I scrolled down. Another one. Subject: Family doesn't steal from family. Then another. And another. By the time I reached the bottom of my inbox, there were at least 20 new messages, half from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, the other half from complete strangers whose names I didn't even recognize. My stomach twisted. Megan slid behind the counter with a tray of dirty dishes. One look at my face, and she frowned. What now? I turned my phone toward her. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. I opened Facebook. And there it was. A public post from Victoria, time-stamped less than an hour ago. Heartbroken beyond words. Betrayed by the one person I thought I could trust. all for greed. Watching someone manipulate my dying father has been the most devastating experience of my life. Please, respect our family's privacy as we go through this difficult time. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, people I barely knew chiming in with sympathy, heart emojis, and of course, passive-aggressive jabs aimed squarely at me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Megan grabbed the phone from my hand, scrolling furiously. This is character assassination. And look, she's letting people fill in the blanks. Not one name mentioned, but everybody knows it's you. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Eric. I picked up. Eric? I saw the Facebook post, he said without preamble. I'm guessing the emails have started too? I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, it's bad. Listen to me carefully, he said. Screenshot everything. Every email. Every text. Every post. Save them all. Do not delete anything. Understood? Yes. Good. And Olivia, brace yourself. This is psychological warfare. But it can help us later. Proof of intimidation and bad faith. I ended the call and sat there, staring at my coffee gone cold. That afternoon, Megan came over with her printer. We sat cross-legged on her living room floor, printing every email, every message, every toxic comment. Stacks of paper grew around us like snowdrifts. By dinner time, my head throbbed, but at least now, I had a paper trail. At exactly 7:16 p.m., my phone lit up with a new text. Laura. They're filing a motion to lift the list pendants. Be ready. I read it twice, the words burning into my brain. So this was it. The smear campaign was just the first wave. I wasn't looking for salvation. But there it was, hidden between yellowed pages and dust. The rain hadn't let up since noon. It rattled against Megan's attic window like impatient fingers. The air smelled of cardboard and mothballs, the kind of scent that clung to forgotten high school yearbooks and holiday decorations no one used anymore. Megan handed me a flashlight and motioned toward the corner stacked with my old storage boxes. If there's anything left from your college days or Grandpa's old letters, it's probably in there, she said, tugging an old quilt tighter around her shoulders. I knelt by the first box, pulling out a stack of mismatched notebooks and folders. My hands trembled. Not from the cold, but from something else. Anticipation, fear, hope. A strange cocktail of all three. Keep a record of your heart, Liv. Harold's words echoed faintly in my mind as I dug deeper. Near the bottom of the box, wedged between an unopened pack of printer paper and a faded college hoodie, I found it. An old leather notebook. Brown, cracked at the edges with Harold's initials embossed on the cover. I froze. Megan noticed immediately. What's that? My grandfather's handwriting, I whispered, my thumb tracing the familiar curves of his script. I opened it, and the attic faded away. His words hit me like waves. March 2022. Olivia's cough hasn't gone away for 2 weeks. Took her to urgent care today. I worry more than I let on. She's the only reason this house still feels alive. June 2022. Victoria called. First time in 3 years. Didn't ask about me. Only asked who my attorney is these days. Red flag noted. August 2022. Spoke with Eric. Made changes official. Olivia deserves peace of mind. This house will go to her. No more second guessing. October 2022. Victoria visited. Brought Dennis. They asked questions about my health, about my will. She laughed when I told her it wasn't her concern. Her smile, cold as glass. Page after page, I read entries that painted a clear, undeniable picture. His thoughts, his intentions, his warnings. By the time I flipped to the last entry, my cheeks were wet with silent tears. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and started taking photos. Every page, every word. Within minutes, I sent the full folder to both Eric and Laura. Eric called me almost immediately. "We now have intent," he said, voice steady, with a low undercurrent of something that almost sounded like relief. Written, time-stamped, irrefutable. For the first time in weeks, my lungs felt like they could actually expand. But before I could let that hope settle, a new email notification appeared on my screen. Subject: Notice of Counterclaim, Allegation, Undue Influence. Sender: Mercer Law Group. I clicked it open, heart racing. "We're counterfiling for undue influence. See you in court." I stared at the screen, a cold, sinking feeling blooming in my chest. So this was how they wanted to play it. They weren't just ignoring the lease pendants. They were daring me to stop them. I sat at my usual table by the front window at the cafe, staring at the property listing on my laptop screen like it had personally insulted me. Status: pending sale. Pending. Like none of the legal filings, phone calls, or sleepless nights had ever happened. I refreshed the page. Same result. "Unbelievable," I muttered, dragging my hands through my hair. Megan, wiping down a nearby table, caught the look on my face. "Still listed?" "Still pending." I clicked on the agent's name, Kelly Morris, and dialed. She answered on the third ring, her voice sickly sweet. "Sunset Realty. This is Kelly." "Hi, this is Olivia Grant." I didn't bother hiding my identity. "I'd like an update on the status of 114 Maple Drive." A pause. Then, "We're in the process of finalizing details with the buyer." "Even with a lis pendens filed against the property?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm not at liberty to discuss legal matters, Ms. Grant," she said carefully. "You'll need to speak with your attorney." "Trust me, I will." I hung up before she could add anything else. I shot a text to Laura and Eric with the update. Within an hour, Eric had drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to both Kelly and the escrow company. He sent me a copy for my records. Subject: Unauthorized property sale. Active litigation warning. In bold letters near the top. "You are exposing yourselves to litigation for facilitating a fraudulent transaction on disputed property under active lis pendens." Laura followed up a few minutes later. "I'm sending this by email and certified mail," she said during a quick call. "Let me handle the paperwork war. You need to keep gathering any last threads of evidence we might need." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Got it." By mid-afternoon, I took a detour past Maple Drive. There, parked right outside the front yard, was a silver Lexus. A man in a tailored suit stood on the front lawn, talking animatedly to Kelly. From the printout in his hand, I guessed he was the buyer, Mr. Holloway, if the online records were correct. I pulled over across the street, rolled my window down just enough to listen. "We weren't told anything about legal disputes," the man was saying, voice edged with irritation. "My wife and I aren't walking into a lawsuit." I grabbed my phone and recorded from my car window, just in case. 2 hours later, Eric called. "Buyer just withdrew their offer," he said, satisfaction heavy in his voice. "They're demanding their deposit back." I let out a slow, trembling breath, equal parts relief and disbelief. But the small victory didn't last long. At exactly 6:43 p.m., my phone rang again. Dennis. I stared at his name on the screen for several seconds before answering. His voice was low and steady, like he'd been rehearsing this line. "You're playing above your league, kid," he said. And then he hung up. Some people fight with fists. My mother fights with lawyers. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, thick cream-colored paper. My name printed in bold letters across the front. Olivia Grant, personal and confidential. I opened it with trembling fingers. Subpoena. The words blurred for a second before snapping back into focus. Notice of civil action, Wallace v. Grant. Grounds: Undue influence, contest of will. My hands went cold. I barely had time to process before my phone lit up. Eric. I just got it, I said without waiting for him to speak. I figured. His tone was clipped, already in battle mode. Mercer filed this morning. They're going full tilt. I sank onto the edge of Megan's couch, the subpoena spread across my lap. So what happens now? Eric sighed. Now? Discovery. Depositions. Motions. Filings. They'll drag every skeleton out of every closet they can find. Yours. Harold's. Anyone they think will make you look bad. They're trying to bleed you out, Laura added, her voice chiming in on the conference call. Bury you in paperwork and legal fees until you crack. Casey, who had joined the call midway, spoke next. Let me run background checks on Dennis and Victoria. If there's financial instability or shady transfers, we'll find it. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to breathe through the rising panic. How much is this going to cost me? I finally asked. Eric hesitated. More than I'd like to say, but we'll take it one motion at a time. That afternoon, I sat in Eric's office as he went over strategy. His whiteboard had arrows, dates, and deadlines scrawled all over it like a war map. Mercer's known for scorched earth tactics, Eric said, tapping the marker against the board. He's going to go after your character first. Expect allegations that you manipulated Harold during his illness, that you isolated him, that you emotionally coerced him into changing the will. My stomach twisted. That's disgusting. I know. Eric gave me a look full of quiet reassurance. That's why we're going to counter every single claim with hard evidence. Witnesses, documents, his journal, emails. Casey leaned in from the doorway. Also, I pulled preliminary bank records on Victoria. There's something odd. Multiple large withdrawals over the past 6 months. Unusual for someone with her spending history. Laura's eyes narrowed. Keep digging. Later that evening, while sitting in Megan's kitchen with a cup of cold tea I hadn't touched, my phone buzzed with a new email. No subject, no sender name, just one line of text. This house will never be yours. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, knowing exactly what this meant. They weren't just fighting me in court. They wanted me to break, before the first hearing even started. Sometimes, the best witness is a lens no one knew was recording. The attic smelled of cedar and damp insulation. Megan's flashlight cut thin beams through the dust, and the rain outside tapped against the roof like restless fingers. We'd been up here for nearly an hour, digging through every forgotten box and plastic tub labeled with faded Sharpie. I was losing hope when Megan let out a sharp gasp. Liv, look at this. She held up a small, scratched memory card. Old. The kind Harold used to use for his camcorder when filming Christmas mornings and 4th of July barbecues. My heart skipped. We scrambled downstairs like kids on a mission. Megan popped the card into her laptop. The screen blinked, and after a few seconds of buffering, the file loaded. The video opened with a shaky shot of Harold's living room, the old recliner by the window, the worn floral curtains, and Harold himself sitting stiffly in his favorite chair. The camera settled into focus as he adjusted his glasses. I covered my mouth. There he was, alive, clear-eyed, speaking straight to the lens. If anyone ever questions my decision, Harold said, his voice both tired and unshakably firm, let this be my voice from beyond. He paused, breathing heavily but steady. I am of sound mind. I've discussed this with my attorney, Eric Lawson. I've had months to consider it. And this house, it belongs to Olivia. She's earned it. Through loyalty. Through love. Through years of sacrifice I never deserved from her. He looked straight at the camera. This isn't about bloodlines. It's about heart lines. Tears streamed down my face. The timestamp on the video showed it was recorded 3 weeks before his passing, months after Victoria's last visit and long after the will had been finalized. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and started uploading the file to Eric and Laura. Minutes later, Eric called, this time with his camera on. He was smiling. Really smiling. "They're done," he said. "This is the nail in their coffin." Laura's message chimed in next. Text to Mercer. New evidence discovered. Pending submission in court. For the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest eased, but just as quickly. My phone buzzed again. Mercer. A simple text. "We need to meet. Tomorrow morning." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. Were they going to surrender? Or escalate? They called it an open house. I called it a battlefield. By the time Sunday afternoon rolled around, I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't scared. I was done playing defense. Megan sat on her couch, holding her phone steady as we stayed connected over live video. "You've got this," she whispered, voice low but fierce. I pulled into the Maple Drive driveway, laptop in one hand, portable speaker in the other. My heart pounded as I stepped out of the car and faced the scene in front of me. Balloons tied to the mailbox. Fresh-cut flowers on the porch. A glossy whiteboard near the door. Open house today. Motivated sellers. Kelly, the broker, stood near the entrance, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. Victoria and Dennis hovered by the living room window, chatting with a middle-aged couple holding a property flyer. I walked straight up the front path. Kelly's smile faltered. "Ms. Grant, this is not an appropriate—" I didn't let her finish. I set my speaker on the porch rail, opened my laptop, and hit play. Harold's voice cut through the spring air like a courtroom gavel. "If anyone ever questions my decision, let this be my voice from beyond." Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Buyers stood frozen, listening. Harold's words filled the entire yard, flowing out of the small speaker but carrying more weight than any loudspeaker ever could. "This house belongs to Olivia. She's earned it. Through loyalty. Through love. Through years of sacrifice I never deserved from her." The older couple near the garden gate backed away. A young couple by the stairs whispered, checking their phones like they were already canceling mortgage pre-approvals. Victoria stood at the front door, pale and motionless. Dennis? Red-faced, jaw clenched. His fists tightened at his sides, but he didn't move toward me. For once, he had no moves left. I waited for the final line of the video. "This isn't about bloodlines. It's about heartlines." I closed the laptop with deliberate care, picked up my speaker, and looked every single person in that yard dead in the eye. "This house isn't for sale," I said, loud and steady. "It's already mine." No one said a word. Not Kelly, not Victoria, not Dennis. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. "Eric." "Mercer just called," he said, barely containing a chuckle. "They're withdrawing all motions. Formal notice coming." I pulled onto the main road, heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with the sharp, undeniable taste of victory. The judge's gavel was just wood, but when it hit the bench, it sounded like thunder. I sat at the plaintiff's table, palms flat against the cool surface, trying to steady my breathing. Eric sat beside me, flipping through a neatly tabbed binder like it was just another Monday. Across the aisle, Mercer stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back, face blank. Victoria sat next to him, lips drawn into a colorless line, her gaze fixed somewhere over the judge's shoulder. Dennis wasn't even pretending to look professional. Slouched in his chair, arms crossed, jaw set like stone. Judge Eleanor Winters entered the courtroom right on schedule, her black robe billowing as she took her seat. "All rise," the bailiff announced. We stood. "All parties may be seated." I dropped into my chair, heart thudding. Eric stood first, calm, controlled, every movement deliberate. Your Honor, he began, this court has been presented with substantial evidence confirming Mr. Harold Grant's intent and state of mind at the time of drafting his will. He gestured toward the evidence table. The original will, signed and witnessed, the personal journal entries written by Mr. Grant in his final months, and lastly, Eric paused for effect, tapping the screen of his tablet. A video recording in which Mr. Grant explicitly outlines his wishes, leaving the property at 114 Maple Drive to his granddaughter, Olivia Grant. A few gasps echoed from the handful of observers seated behind us, local reporters, curious neighbors, a few distant relatives I barely recognized. Mercer rose next. My clients, he cleared his throat, wish to formally withdraw all objections and counterclaims. We concede ownership of the property. That was it. No fight left, no rebuttal, not even an apology. I turned toward Victoria, searching for, I don't even know what. Regret? Sadness? Remorse? Nothing. Her face remained frozen, a perfect polished mask. Judge Winters adjusted her glasses and looked directly at me. This court hereby declares legal ownership of 114 Maple Drive to rest solely with Olivia Grant. All opposing motions are dismissed with prejudice. The court further orders the immediate vacating of the premises by any unauthorized occupants within 72 hours. She raised the gavel. Crack. It fell like the final note of a long, bitter song. I sat there, staring at the wood grain of the table, blinking fast as tears welled up. Eric reached over and squeezed my hand. It's done, he whispered. We started gathering our things. That's when I heard the softest sound, a whisper just behind me. I turned. Victoria stood in the aisle, her coat draped over one arm, her purse clutched like a shield. You think you've won? She murmured, her voice sharp as glass. You've just started a war. And with that, she walked out of the courtroom, heels clicking like gunshots down the marble hallway. I walked back into my house, and it felt like breaking into a museum where the memories had been stolen. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, the new lock still stiff from installation. Pale afternoon sunlight drifted through the living room window, catching the dust suspended in the air like tiny, drifting ghosts. My shoes echoed against the hardwood floor. The walls, once crowded with family photos and Harold's framed newspaper clippings, stood bare now. Rectangular outlines marked where each frame had hung for decades. I made my way from room to room. The living room, empty except for the faded rug I refused to let them take. The dining area, where Harold used to carve the Thanksgiving turkey, now held nothing but silence. The bedroom, his bedroom, was stripped clean. Even the old lamp with the cracked shade was gone. I sank down onto the floor of my old bedroom. The closet door stood ajar, hollow and abandoned like everything else in this house. Megan arrived an hour later, balancing a small bag of groceries and a container of coffee. I brought caffeine and moral support. I managed a weak smile. You might want to lower your expectations on both. We sat on the living room floor, sipping lukewarm coffee from paper cups. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson dropped by shortly after, handing over a plate of still-warm cookies wrapped in foil. We just wanted to say, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. Harold would be proud. Their kindness only made the ache in my chest grow sharper. Later, as Megan packed up the trash left behind by the movers, my phone rang. Eric. Hey, I answered. I've been thinking, he said, voice low but serious. You have grounds to sue for damages, lost property, emotional distress. They sold off Harold's belongings without consent. I glanced around the room, eyes lingering on the empty bookshelves. I don't know, Eric. My voice cracked despite my best efforts to sound steady. I'm tired. I don't know if I want to keep fighting. There was a pause on the line. It's your call, he said softly. Whatever you decide, I'll back you. After we hung up, I stood by the front door holding the new set of keys. This time, I changed the lock myself. Hands shaking, but steady enough to finish the job. As the bolt slid into place, a small surge of relief bloomed in my chest. Mine. It was finally mine. When I stepped out to grab the mail, the first thing I noticed was the envelope sitting on top of the stack. No return address, no postage stamp. Just my name, scrawled in thick black ink. Inside, one single line typed on cheap printer paper. Don't get too comfortable. I stood there on the porch, fingers tightening around the paper, feeling the fight stir again somewhere deep in my bones. This isn't just a house anymore. It's a story I refuse to let them rewrite. The first stroke of paint hit the bedroom wall just after sunrise, soft gray, replacing the faded lavender Harold had let me pick when I was 12. The roller glided back and forth, leaving behind a fresh, clean layer that felt almost symbolic. I stepped back, studying my work with a small, tired smile. The walls weren't the only thing changing. The bookshelves in the living room sat empty, still scarred with dust outlines. But that would change too. I'd already ordered a dozen titles online: memoirs, legal case studies, books on property law, things I never thought I'd care about until now. My phone buzzed on the windowsill. Eric. "Good morning, homeowner," he greeted, light humor in his voice. "How's it feel?" I glanced around, heart full and sore at the same time. Like standing in the middle of a battlefield, after everyone's gone home. He chuckled. "You know, you should really think about law school." I blinked. "Law school?" "Think about it," Eric said. "You've got the stubborn streak, the documentation skills, and now, first-hand litigation experience." I laughed for the first time in weeks. "I'll consider it." After we hung up, I scrolled through my text messages. One new notification. Victoria. Her first message since the verdict. "We're still family. Think about that." I stared at the words, my stomach tightening with something between anger and pity. I thought about her absence at every school event, about the locks she changed, about the lies she told, and then about Harold's voice in that video, about the neighbors who stood up for me, about Megan, sitting on my porch every other night, bringing me coffee and pep talks. I typed my reply slowly, deliberately. Family is who shows up, who stays, who fights for you. I hit send. No hesitation. Moments later, Megan pulled up to the curb, holding 2 to-go coffee cups high like victory flags. "Thought you could use some caffeine to go with that fresh paint smell." We sat together on the porch, legs stretched out, sipping coffee and watching the early June sun filter through the maple trees lining the street. The same trees Harold used to rake leaves under every fall. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard for a second before typing. Law school admissions, Seattle. As the page loaded, I glanced down the road. Sunlight streaked through the trees, catching the dust in the air just right. I let out a long, steady breath. "This is mine now." I whispered to no one in particular. All of it. After months of being pushed aside, lied to, and legally cornered, Olivia didn't just reclaim her house. She reclaimed her voice. The battle wasn't won overnight, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. But one undeniable truth remained. No amount of manipulation could erase what was rightfully hers. Justice had taken its time, but like the sound of a gavel cracking through silence, it arrived, loud and final. Because when lies crumble, all that stands is proof and perseverance. And that was how I took back my house. Not with screaming matches, not with revenge, but with proof, paper trails, and the kind of persistence that people like Victoria never expect. They thought I'd give up after the first email, after the public smear posts, after the threats, the lawsuits, The anonymous letters shoved under my door at midnight. But what they forgot is that people like me, we've spent our whole lives swallowing our anger, letting things slide, telling ourselves it's not worth the fight. Until one day, it is. That day when you stand outside your own locked front door, holding bagels and coffee, staring at a house that's legally yours, and realizing that the only way to stop people from stealing what's yours is to stop being the quiet one. I didn't set out to start a war, but when they declared it, I finished it. And here's what I learned. You don't need to scream to make your voice heard. You don't need to burn bridges to protect your peace. Sometimes all you need is evidence, resilience, and the courage to say, not this time. So if you're sitting there, feeling erased, replaced, or gaslit by the very people who should protect you, let this story remind you, you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you're definitely not powerless. Thank you for staying till the end. If this story made your chest tighten, if you've ever been made to feel small in a house that should have been your sanctuary, hit that like button. Leave me a comment. Just type 1 if you've been there, 2 if you're still in the middle of your own fight, or 3 if you're here just for the sweet taste of justice. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because sometimes the loudest victories come from the quietest people who finally say enough.